The answer is as young as possible. Like, no, young as possible.
Hello everyone. No intro today, so you know what that means. We have a serious topic to discuss. You remember back in 2021 and 2022 when we talked about the House of Cataphor? The alleged Australian BDSM cult? Well, they're back. Or more specifically, their patriarch, and I use that title specifically for a reason, James Robert Davis, is back. And we need to talk about it because there have been some updates to this case that even I didn't see coming. So, first of all, to give you a brief summary for those of you who were not around when the story broke a few years ago, you are in for quite the ride. There was a Dom who styled himself BD Jimmy. Yes, that was his username on Instagram, who was also somewhat popular on FetLife. He had been writing about power exchange online for a long time, contributing to places like the Garden Forum since 2015. He was a known quantity in the Australian BDSM scene and once hosted play parties when he lived closer to the city. Eventually, though, he decided he wanted to live out his libertarian, anti-government fantasies and move to a large parcel of land in a more remote rural area. Several female partners joined him. Jimmy refers to himself as a polygamist in particular, and they were also his slaves. At one point, he tried to get a documentary made about his family and kink lifestyle called Cataphor, a story about love, family, and slavery. At one point, a teaser video was shared on the crowdfunding websites they used, which showed a little bit more of their home. They seem to have achieved the kinky polyamorous dream, a large private property all to themselves, a single experienced older male dom with a gaggle of younger obedient female slaves who were never jealous and all loved each other, kneeling and reciting their devotional mantras before going off to clean the house and make dinner for him. Dare I say, it seemed picturesque. Of course, much of Jimmy's earlier internet presence has long since been scrubbed, but what remains may seem incongruous with his more recent statements or the accusations against him, at least at first blush. In 2015, he wrote about how he loved that the rope community was educating bottoms. That's great, right? But he doesn't talk about how rope bottoms are encouraged to self-tie now or come with their own negotiation frameworks. Instead, he remarked, quote, "When I talk about the questions a rope bottom could have asked the incompetent rope top prior to getting injured, or warning signs they may have been able to look out for that may have saved them from the injury, no one accuses me of saying that the unfortunate injured party deserves to be injured, and they are totally to blame for what happened. No, they just nod and go, good advice." His focus is on the relief he feels that he won't be called a victim blamer, even though his advice is focusing on telling bottoms that it's their fault if they don't know to ask the right questions and then get hurt as a result. Personal responsibility in consensual kink, right? This attitude is exactly why I have sometimes been suspicious of folks who overemphasize that phrase. It's a really great tool to have in your back pocket if you want to feel justified in whipping out the old, "but what did you do wrong?" question in the face of someone's consent being violated. Now, I don't want to be accused of cherry picking, so I have another example. In 2018, Jimmy posted about his negotiation routine. Innocent enough and nothing glaringly wrong except that instead of asking bottoms with triggers what they need for support, he instead says, "If you are triggered, this is what I'm going to ask you to do," which, in my non-professional opinion, maybe not the best way to handle triggers. For some strange reason, though, he ends the post on a sour note, stating, "And if you don't like it, that's cool. You really don't need to have a conniption in the comment section. Just go J.O. or do something else with all that anger and frustration." Repeatedly, across his former online presence, you can see that he expects to be hated. Jimmy the martyr, always being crucified by the consent police. A real persecution complex. And as a lapsed Catholic, I know a thing or two about that. Even though, as far as I can tell, he was far from the most hated dom on the internet. I'm sharing all this because I believe this "I'm right and people hate me for it" attitude kind of led to where we're at today, at least in some part. So, while Mr. Jimmy was writing posts and uploading photos to Instagram, something else was stirring in the background. It started with a panicked call to the ABC switchboard asking to speak to someone in the newsroom. The desperate voice on the other end of the line was begging for help. The initial conversation was the first of dozens that followed a similar pattern, describing how a sex cult was allegedly harming vulnerable young women and despairing that authorities seemed unable or unwilling to intervene. This is how a 5-month investigation by ABC Investigations and Four Corners into former Australian Army soldier James Davis and his acolytes, the so-called House of Cataphor, began. It ended with a dramatic police raid after Four Corners provided information to the Australian Federal Police. Davis was arrested in the car park of the local hardware store by plainclothes AFP officers and charged with sexual slavery offenses. A Four Corners documentary was also released, alleging that between 2012 and 2015, a victim was forced to sell herself on behalf of her so-called master, from which she saw no money. The victim also alleged that they were not free to leave the relationship and were also physically abused. And that was just what got the police involved. As I said, Jimmy was a known quantity in the Australian kink landscape, and I chose that phrase for a reason. People had been monitoring his behavior for a long time, and when the case got media attention, more details came to light.
I received a official letter from UNE banning me from UNE for 24 months. They want to, based on nothing but how I choose to have sex, or the relationships I choose, decide that I'm so dangerous that I need to be banned from their campus.
It was revealed that he was barred from the local Australian BDSM scene. Evidence posted on his social media pointed to him having collared a girl when she was still in high school. Something he claimed to be perfectly fine because she was above the age of consent at the time, despite the fact that he was old enough to be one of her parents. He made adult content frequently with his partners, including, allegedly, with at least one who would have been below the minimum age requirement to be featured in such material in Australia. Numerous people also found profiles on escort websites that matched his partners, giving credence to the previous claim of somebody having to sell themselves. It seemed even his claim of being a veteran had a shady backstory, with investigators discovering he was discharged from the military after a physical altercation which he escalated. Jimmy's arrest was followed by a protracted court case, which I covered part of, where he was held without bail for 20 months. The charges changed several times over the years, ranging from slavery to sexual intercourse without consent to assault occasioning bodily harm, torturing an animal, detaining a person, possession of unauthorized firearms, and more. Over 60 charges were brought against Jimmy between 2021 and January of 2024, just half a year ago. He was released on bail between those times in December of 2022. Why Jimmy's case was changed so many times is a question for an Australian attorney, but in the end, it all came to nothing, as sexual offenses so often do. Sources vary on this point, with some stating that most charges were dropped except for a few on stalking and intimidation in January of this year. Others say that all of the charges were dropped that month. But in either case, Jimmy appeared to be walking around as a free man with open access to the internet. It also appears that was a very bad idea. You might be wondering at this point, what happened to Jimmy's partners? Did his half-dozen loyal slaves stay by his side, or did everything fall apart while he was behind bars? It might be tempting to think of them as just naive young women who may have only needed time without him to break the influence of his spell. And though young many of them are, quite young, that did not seem to materialize. The group was seen bravely walking together during court appearances, and more recent social media postings show them all still together, seemingly as strong as ever.
Hey everyone, Editing Evie here, popping in real quick because I have two things that I did not know about at the time I was writing this part of the video, and if I had known about them, I would have covered this and talked about this a little bit differently. So the first thing I want to talk about is when I was doing the prep work to edit the video, I was going through my whole House of Cataphor photo collection to make sure that I had all the faces of all the women blocked out. And I was going through each one and I had them really zoomed in to make sure I wasn't missing anything. And in the background of one of these photos, I saw that there was a calendar that said it was from 2020, even though I know it had come from a recent social media post and was being passed off as being in current day. And I thought that was weird, but I didn't know what to make of it because it was the only one like it. I didn't have anything to compare it to, and because the rest of his social media presence is totally erased, I didn't know if it had ever actually been posted before at a different time or what. And secondarily to this, I actually went back on FetLife to try and find some more information because FetLife very recently updated their search parameters. So now you can actually go through and search statuses. And that means I had access to a lot of information from users I didn't know from Australia that typically I would not have been able to see before unless I knew the user. And I was searching by some of the nicknames and usernames that I knew that Jimmy and some of his compatriots have used over the years. And I was able to find one user in particular who has been covering and updating the cases against Jimmy. And according to them, one, they were somebody who supported that all of the cases were not dropped previously earlier on in 2024. And they also stated that, at least from what they believe, he, Jimmy, was posting these photos, passing them off as being from current day, when really they were old photos, and actually a lot of these women, if not all of them, have totally scattered and are not directly associated with Jimmy anymore. If that's true, that is fantastic. I honestly didn't think I could hope that all 6 of these women would be able to get out of this scenario with this person that, as you will later find out towards the end of this whole train wreck, is probably a very dangerous person. I'm so glad that if they felt like they were able to get out of this relationship, even though it was very highly invested for a lot of them at this point, I would just feel so much relief if that was the case. And I still will maintain the point I'm about to make in part that several of these women also helped perpetuate a lot of harm against other women and did bad things themselves. And it's important to remember that there is no such thing as a perfect victim. Things can be complicated. People can both hurt others and also be hurt themselves. People can hurt others and still be victims of abuse. It's all very complicated, but I felt that that was important to say. Of course, at this point, there's very little hard evidence proven in court for basically anything. This is all just speculation. I am now leaning more towards a lot of the photos that were posted on social media now actually being from much earlier before, possibly posted without the consent of the women actually in the photos, which makes it even worse. And yeah, I will probably have to pop back in another time or two just to give some more updates based on what I know now. But that's more or less what I want to say for the time being. Let's go ahead and get back into it.
I want to try and make this point delicately, but I do need to be frank about it. Jimmy's partners should not be universally seen as hapless victims. Some of them are, in varying degrees, especially at the start, no doubt, but it is more complicated than just that. The family was accused of participating in a conspiracy to falsely blame famed BDSM influencer The Wolf for assault. The alleged motive? Jimmy's burning jealousy of The Wolf's fame. Another, just 22 at the time, was arrested herself early in the legal proceedings, accused of actively enabling sexual activity with a person under 16 and transmitting CSA material, before later being released. Outside of the courtroom, those who have kept eyes on Jimmy's house for a long time had some additional accusations to level at his girls. The two who had been around the longest were said to have played a Maxwell-like role for Jimmy, helping to lure in young newbie subs, enthralled by the promise of a loving found family. One of the first girls to join up was allegedly going to public BDSM events with a fake ID and a fake story about her life while underaged, leading to many people having interactions with her under false pretenses.
We did a photo shoot together. It was a fashion photo shoot that I was currently, at the time, trying to build up my fashion portfolio because I was doing a lot of fashion modeling, a lot of glamour modeling, and he took those photos for me. And then he asked me if I wanted to do nude photos, and I was 16, and I then said, I'm actually not 21 like I said, I'm actually 16, and he went, oh my god. Anyway, cool story. Everyone on the set that day, and the photographer, who was Master, thought I was 21 because I told everyone that I was 21. At the time, I was 16, and not long after, I started dating Master.
She had a great Model Mayhem account. She was doing great. She was being booked by everyone.
I told everyone online and Master, who I started dating, that I was 21 years of age. I lied and said that I was 21. I lied. I was also, to clarify, I was having sex with men Master's age, younger and older, for a relatively significant period of time as a 21-year-old.
Then one day she turns around and she says, like, I've got to tell you this thing. I'm 16.
I was like, I'm not 21. I lied about my age by 5 years.
Almost all of them have multiple advanced degrees, leaving spectators to wonder if they were defrauding the Australian government for financial purposes in the process. At least one who worked as a nurse was accused of misappropriating medical supplies for personal use. As you can see, the accusations here are varied and long-running, going back a decade at least. But you may have noticed that I don't have as many on-screen citations as I normally do here, and a fair bit of this is from my memory from the last time we talked about this a couple years ago. And this is not because I'm trying to be lazy and don't want to look it up again. It's because the records of some of these articles and some of these postings no longer exist. You see, our dear Jimmy, from the very beginning, has fought for these proceedings to be as quiet as possible. He does not want them in the public eye. Journalists have said that his partners have requested article takedowns on his behalf, and it largely works. A new story will come out, a new update on his court case will happen, and a few days later, the article disappears. If you aren't there when it happens, you would never know it existed at all. Several of the places that were keeping track of Jimmy's legal proceedings, like the subreddit called Catafake and a website by the same name, have been erased from the internet. Jimmy's social media presence, as well as that of his partners, have also been basically totally wiped, except for a few little tidbits and pieces I've archived for myself over the years, and presumably whatever the police have. It is the internet after all, and it's hard to get rid of everything. That and, well, again, our dear Jimmy, deep down, craves attention. And he will take infamy if that's all he can get. Martyr complex, you know? You see, Jimmy just can't help himself. Just a few months after posting bail, Jimmy was back on Twitter.com. Where else? With a new name. Casey Jones. Back on the road to recognition. I think I might be the first person on the internet to report on this semi-secret account. But don't worry, Jimmy. I've archived it thoroughly, because I fully expect you're going to wipe this too, if you get the chance. This is some of the most revealing stuff I have ever seen Jimmy talk about in public. Maybe because he felt like he was untouchable after the charges against him were dropped. Despite the fake name, though, it is very obviously him, with dozens and dozens of unique photos and videos that have never appeared anywhere else online. What he said on this account really connected some dots for me, and not in a fun way. Jimmy always seemed to have something of an anti-feminist bent to his postings, but nothing super extreme. I'm not sure if he was just hiding his power level before. If you know, you know, or if the worst of it was already gone by the time I went looking. But it seems like Jimmy was at some point radicalized. This was obvious from the very start of his new Twitter account. Though he had made the account in April, the earliest postings and replies I can see are from May. It all started off in a relatively benign way, replying to posts about UFC and talking about Australian soda brands that are nostalgic. But one thing soon became clear. Jimmy hates women. Like, hates women. He hates feminists, yes, but he's probably one of the biggest across-the-board misogynists I have ever seen online. Possibly even more than Andrew Tate, though I would suspect he'd take that as a compliment. From his earliest postings, he's made his disgust for women clear. He wasted no time in asserting that women, categorically, are untrustworthy hybristophiliacs who hate men just as much as he hates them. He joked about the use of ovens to remove dumb, i.e. liberal women from the breeding population. I'm afraid if I paraphrase, I will be accused of hyperbole, so buckle up. I'm about to read some of the worst things I've probably ever quoted on this channel. We are not the same species. We are two different species that evolved separately yet symbiotically. One inside the cave, the other outside the cave. No, I am not joking. Women as a species lack the frontal neocortex capacity to conceptualize due process. Their species operates off gossip, neuroticism, and monolithic collectivist in-group thinking. The lack of capacity for abstract thought is a feminine quality. The masculine capacity for abstract thought is the higher reasoning that gave birth to philosophy, physics, medicine, and space travel. They all desire to return to their natural habitat. The blood memory craves the kitchen. And that is not even the half of it. He goes on to say, quote, women are incapable of love. They can be infatuated, lustful, dependent, attached, needy, and even obsessed. But they cannot love. Men love women for who they are. Women love men for what they are. As soon as what a man is changes, they stop loving him. As soon as they stop providing the utilitarian purpose they were selected for, she will immediately stop loving you. Why don't women ever feel bad for being evil and cruel? Women are virtually incapable of feeling guilt. The only person capable of making a woman feel guilt is her mother. Outside of this exception, women are impervious to the guilt that would make any other moral and rational person feel bad for doing bad. Women are incapable of ever considering anything they do as being in the wrong. He uses these feelings to justify his belief that women shouldn't vote, shouldn't hold office, or ever be taken seriously, even about their own bodies or about pregnancy, since he even believes maternal instinct is a gynocentric lie.
And just to really hammer home this point, I also want to add this quote that I found when I was finishing up this video. And it says, women are good, are literally nothing. I think he means at literally nothing because Jimmy is literally not good at tweeting. Anyways, it goes on to say, statistical data even proves men make better mothers. The only value women offer is a fertile uterus. At everything else, they are glorified special ed kids being humored by the men around them. Just, wow. If you don't see it after hearing that tweet, I don't know what to tell you.
I consider myself to be pretty educated about the manosphere, at least as an outsider, even the dark parts of it. But Jimmy takes the misogyny to a whole new level. Like, at least with a lot of the trad hunters out there, they think that women are good at raising kids and cooking. But Jimmy seems to believe that women are too stupid and ontologically evil to even be able to manage that. It may not shock you to learn then that Jimmy was once married before his whole polygamous lifestyle took off. This may be the most terminal case of divorce court victim I have ever seen in my entire life, declaring that he was R-worded by the family courts.
So it became a sexless marriage. I was unfaithful several times throughout. She'd inevitably find out about my infidelity. I'd go, oh, well, that's it. I suppose it's time for us to break up now. And she would go, no, we're not breaking up. And she'd the shit out of me for about 3 weeks, which really confused me at the time. And then once she felt that she'd resecured her resource, the sex never get turned off again.
So this clip confirms that this is the most divorced man of all time. He cheated on his wife repeatedly for years and kept getting caught, and instead of thinking, I'm a bad person for doing this and hurting my spouse repeatedly, his takeaway message was that he learned the true nature of women and that women actually want to be hurt and to be made jealous, and you can tell because they'll suddenly have sex with you more temporarily after you hurt them by making them jealous. That's not you actually destroying the relationship. That's not actually you damaging them in any way. Actually just proves that women's nature is that they desire to be made to feel less than by your ability to cheat on them openly and get away with it. Oh, people listen to this. They take this seriously. Oh my God. Okay, back to the rest of the video.
Rich, coming from a man who thinks the victims of Harvey Weinstein were just women who regretted things after getting what they wanted, and that the statute of limitation for assault should be no more than 7 days. Considering he was just in jail for such charges, though, maybe it's not too shocking. In fact, what he seems to believe is that getting a false R-word allegation should be a badge of honor, and that if you don't have at least one under your belt, it means you're not making enough waves. Maybe that explains why he decided to use his girls like attack dogs to take down his rival the wolf. After all, women are incapable of seeing anything they do as wrong anyway. They're just following their natural instinct. Might as well put it to good use. As Jimmy once allegedly claimed, he's going to get what's coming to him. The best way to get at someone is through their exes, since it's easy to get spiteful women riled up for revenge. He also believes women are fundamentally attracted to violent men. Quote, men accept, adapt to, and embrace hybristophilia or be destroyed. I would even argue that as women's value of a man increases with his demonstrated capacity for violence and womanizing, sin increases the value of men the way virtue does for women. In his mind, it is a strong enough instinct that it trumps even hypergamy. Naturally, then, he believes the only way to subvert the gynocentric order is to no longer be a wage slave and instead have women work to support their male partners.
And I also want to add, I think potentially he also doesn't want to work because, and I'm not sure how Australian family law operates, but potentially because he doesn't have an income, maybe he doesn't have to pay alimony or child support, or maybe doesn't have to pay very much of it, and he can still be supported by women in his life. Or maybe he's just a total layabout and he hates working, or maybe he can't find a job because of what he got discharged for from the military. I don't know. Lots of possibilities.
Perhaps now you can see why I've taken all this time to catalog this man's tweets. He stood accused of over 60 charges, most of which included violence against women. I'm no expert, but a lot of what he says here seems to indicate he's capable of what was being alleged. If he believed that women should work to financially support the men in their lives and men should not do the same, up to the point that all of the women in his life have multiple degrees and most of them work outside of the home while he does not, and also they sell their bodies for him, is it so hard to believe that he would lead some of them into selling their bodies when they didn't want to, and also into the prawn industry? If he hates women so much, is it hard to believe that he'd hurt one or violate their consent? After all, they're barely human. They aren't even the same species. Studies have shown that misogyny can be a predictive factor in IPV and violence against women more generally. As one study put it, quote, "The results show that misogyny predicts violent extremist intentions, willingness to engage in interpersonal violence, and increased support for violence against women via revenge planning and hypermasculinity, particularly among men who experience a sense of violated entitlement and greater threats to the in-group." And this is not even getting into his long history of racism. I don't want to repeat or show a lot of the things he said, they are that vile. But for example, he had a long-time habit of replying to stories about people of color with covers of movies about chimps and Jane Goodall memes. But he says it's all fine because, he's actually just a funny racist, and you would know that if you served in the military like he did. I guess poorly wearing an impersonation of a uniform after being discharged from service entitles you to be racist for life, I guess? And really, it all makes sense once you realize he once lamented not being able to see Nazi outfits at kink parties anymore, like the way he used to be able to, because, the woke karate ruined kink and got rid of them. Ah, yes, Nazi outfits. I think we're really missing something by not having those at every kink party anymore. Although I have to ask, what parties were you going to where they were that common? Because over the last 9 years, I have been to dungeons in multiple states. I have attended massive conferences and even traveled internationally for kink several times. And I have yet to ever see a single legitimate Nazi uniform in person. Ones that are kind of vaguely referencing the design aesthetic, sure, like once probably, but it was never like a big thing. I'd love to ask him why he misses them so much, but alas, dear viewer, our tale does not end here. Because the extreme misogyny and racism weren't enough, Mr. Jimmy has yet one more deeply dangerous and concerning belief. That having sex with very young girls is normal and acceptable. You already know that he was involved with a teenager who was still in high school when she was probably about 16 or 17 at that time.
If I wanted to do nude photos and I was 16 and I then said, I'm actually not 21 like I said, I'm actually 16, and he went, oh my god. Anyway, cool story.
She was also likely involved in his adult prawn content at that age, which is illegal in Australia. He's pushed the boundaries on this before and documented it with pride. But as you might imagine for someone who is an avowed misogynist, it does not stop there. He's endorsed posts that state women mature earlier than men and thus should be considered adults earlier, as well as ones that talk about how younger women are more fertile and desirable. He's explicitly talked about his attraction to young women from broken homes with poor mental health. And he's always trying to get the largest age gap he possibly can, posting in January this year about how he looked forward to finally reaching that sweet 30-year age gap. It seemed, though, that he may have already been working towards achieving that age gap goal.
This leads to the next question. When's a good age to start dating a girl? What's a good age for a prospective partner? There you are. You've made yourself into a man. You have options. You can protect. You can provide. You've built your little mini empire, and you're in a position where you can now, open up your time in your life to bring in a woman or women in a full-time relationship capacity. Maybe, hopefully, to have bear children with and share a lifelong relationship with. Build a family with. What age should you do this? What age should the woman be? Well, I put it to you. The answer is as young as possible. Young as possible. Like, oh, you're just trying to bring in these young girls because they're young and impressionable, and you're going to indoctrinate them into being the perfect little submissive housewife. Like, yeah, that's exactly right.
You see, our dear Jimmy, while he was busy posting away on Twitter, celebrating his freedom, was also getting up to some other things online. In fact, our whole sordid tale today has been working up to this point. In April of this year, James Robert Davis was arrested again, this time for allegedly procuring a minor child for unlawful sexual activities in Sydney. A man has been accused of procuring a 13-year-old child to have sex with him just months after all charges in an alleged BDSM sex cult case were dropped. James Robert Davis, 43, appeared in Waverley Court via audiovisual link on Tuesday to apply for bail after he was taken into custody on remand over the fresh allegations. Police allege in court documents he procured a 13-year-old child to have illegal sex with him at a location in Sydney's southwest during the 15 months leading up to April 1st. After gaining access to the child, he is further accused of sexually touching them once in March and twice during the afternoon of April 1st. He appears to have, at this point, been denied bail. Thank goodness. It is hard for me to articulate how angry this makes me. This man was in custody for over a year. He was openly posting about his beliefs, sharing his face with it and all for much longer. And then he slipped through the cracks, and the first thing he seemingly does while free is hurt a child. I hope the original prosecutors feel guilty about this for not managing to be able to take this original case to trial. I hope the police feel guilty for not taking years of reports up to this point seriously. Considering how much I have seen just from what he posted to one Twitter account, I am confident that the other allegations against him should have held enough merit to get in front of a judge and jury. And I don't know why it didn't happen. I am glad that he is being investigated again now, although I imagine there's nothing that can be done about the old charges that were previously dismissed. There is one thing, though, that I cannot get my mind off of, and this is what really gets me. It was reported that while he was still being held in jail a few years ago, that one of his wives had recently had a child after years of fertility treatments.
And through the new information I was able to get on FetLife, I discovered that the mother of this child, who at least used to be one of his slaves, had an apprehended violence order, or an AVO, against him in 2023. I am not sure if that extends to the child. It seems to be similar to an American protection order or restraining order. I really hope that means that she is safe and away from him. And this also contributes to the idea that he may have been posting these photos without all of these women's consent, and that he's not really with any of them anymore. People did also find him basically as soon as he had any kind of internet access, going on swinging websites and trying to date people, so that is not surprising. He also claimed he was single. He does also have, I found, one photo with the daughter he had from his original monogamous marriage, which is concerning that he has any degree of visitation or custody with her. I imagine now that hopefully will probably change, and I can only hope the best for all of the children involved and all of the mothers involved in this as well.
Am I out of my mind for being concerned for the well-being of this kid too? Like, I hope they're with their grandparents somewhere. But a man can only make so many jokes like, I like my scotch like I like my women, 16 years old and stored in my cellar so often before it might be a good idea to check the cellar. And all of this is devastating. I truly hope now that justice will be done and it won't be another 2 years of waffling around just for nothing to materialize. If there is any lesson to be gleaned from this, it is that we need to believe people when they show us who they are. The anti-feminist, misogynist manosphere can be dangerous. It is not just internet trolling. This is why I made a video a few months ago about them and how they could impact the kink community. Because people like James can enter into our community, say the right things, anoint themselves a thought leader while believing some pretty disgusting things in the not-so-distant background. I'm not sure what the right next steps should be, but maybe we need to pay closer attention to the guys with an eternal martyr complex who hate women if we want to build a safer community. And yeah, this is just, like I said, it's so devastating. It really hurts my heart, and I hope that you all appreciate getting this update because I have had to do quite a lot of work to preserve a lot of this, as I'm afraid that it's going to be taken offline and will no longer be part of accessible public record. But, hey, it is the internet, and I don't know who else maybe would have preserved it too, but yeah, I guess let me know what you're thinking in a comment down below if you remember this case from back in the day, if you have any other information you want to share, if anything that happened that was important I missed, also feel free to share it down below. I do make videos twice a week about kink and BDSM, oftentimes now these days, news topics, pop culture things, but also education as well, because I do think that is really, really important for people to be able to keep themselves safe. If you already support me over on Patreon, thank you so much for making this possible, because this allows me to be able to take the risk in making videos like this that, because of the nature of what I'm talking about, will definitely be demonetized. Hopefully not age restricted, but we'll see how it comes out in the edit. I may have to be creative with some muting and censoring, as much as I hate doing that, but hopefully you all understand. Thank you all so much again for supporting me. Again, keep yourself safe, and I will talk to you all again very soon. Bye.